Jesse Ventura stood in the Mexican jungle outside Puerto Vallarta, wearing a harness he had helped design himself, and gripped a weapon that weighed more than most men could bench press. It was an 85-pound M134 Minigun, modified with a backwards M60 handguard and powered by electrical cables that ran up the inside of his pant leg to a battery pack hidden in the bushes. He pulled the trigger. The barrel spun at 1,250 rounds per minute. Even at a fraction of the weapon's true capability, the recoil hit him like a jackhammer pressed against his chest. He described the experience later with 2 words, like shooting a chainsaw. That moment, filmed in 1986 on the set of Predator, created one of the most iconic images in action cinema, a man holding a weapon that no human being was ever supposed to hold. The reason it looks so convincing on screen is the same reason the military never wanted it. The M134 Minigun was built for helicopters and gunships. It was built for machines. But a wrestler turned actor turned future governor of Minnesota made the whole world believe a man could tame it. The thing is, the minigun told the truth about Jesse Ventura before Jesse Ventura ever had to. If you enjoy deep dives into weapons like this, the real stories behind what you see on screen, consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Before we talk about the man, we need to understand what he was holding. The ammunition canister strapped to Ventura's back on the Predator set held roughly 550 rounds of 7.6 2x51mm NATO ammunition at the weapon's reduced firing rate of 1,250 rounds per minute. That gave him approximately 25 seconds of continuous fire. 25 seconds. That was the entire supply. During non-firing scenes, the prop department flipped the ammo box upside down and turned the feed chute backwards so the camera would not catch that the canister was completely empty, a brilliant illusion hiding a practical impossibility. The weapon's technical advisor, Kevin Dockery, later confirmed the gun was a genuine M134, not the smaller M214 microgun that internet rumors have claimed for decades. The full-sized minigun, the same weapon mounted on Huey helicopter door guns in Vietnam, where it was fed by ammunition belts that stretched through the aircraft fuselage to containers holding thousands of rounds. On the helicopter, the gun made sense. In a man's hands, the math falls apart instantly, and that math is worth doing because it exposes the fantasy at the heart of the most famous gun scene ever filmed. At full speed, an M134 fires 6,000 rounds per minute, which is 100 rounds per second. Each 7.62 NATO cartridge in a linked belt weighs roughly 6 pounds per 100 rounds. To fire the minigun at full rate for just 60 seconds, you would need 6,000 rounds, weighing approximately 360 pounds. Add the gun, which weighs 85 pounds. Add the external battery required to spin the electric motor. You are now asking a single infantryman to carry over 450 pounds through a jungle and to fire a weapon generating enough recoil to knock him off his feet. The military understood this immediately. They understood it because they had tried. The story of the M134 starts not in 1987 on a movie set, but in 1861 in an apartment in Indianapolis. Richard Jordan Gatling was a doctor. He had earned his medical degree from the Ohio Medical College in 1850, but he never treated a single patient. Gatling was an inventor by compulsion, a man who had already patented a screw propeller for steamboats, a rice sewing machine, and a wheat drill before the Civil War erupted around him. From his window in Indianapolis, Gatling watched trainloads of wounded Union soldiers returning from the front, but what disturbed him most was not the men with bullet wounds. It was the men dying of typhoid, dysentery, and pneumonia. Disease killed more soldiers in the Civil War than combat did, and Gatling, the doctor who never doctored, arrived at a conclusion that would define the next century of weapons development. If one man could do the killing work of 100, he reasoned, then armies could be smaller. Fewer soldiers in the field meant fewer soldiers exposed to disease. The Gatling gun would save lives by making killing so efficient that wars would become shorter and smaller. It was the same logic that would later be used to justify the atomic bomb. And it was wrong for the same reason. The Gatling gun did not make armies smaller. It made battlefields wider, engagements longer, and the dead more numerous. The weapon Gatling designed to show how futile war became the instrument that made it industrial. This is the original sin of the rotating barrel, and every weapon descended from it, including the M134 minigun that Jesse Ventura would one day hold in a Mexican jungle, carries that sin forward. Gatling's gun used a hand crank to rotate 6 barrels, each barrel loaded, fired, and ejected in sequence. The rotating design solved the most persistent problem in rapid-fire weapons: overheating. By spreading the firing duty across multiple barrels, no single tube absorbed enough heat to warp or fail. When the gun was officially adopted by the United States Army in 1866, it could fire 200 rounds per minute with remarkable accuracy. But here's where the story gets ugly. The same year, George Armstrong Custer was offered 3 Gatling guns for his campaign against the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne at Little Bighorn. Custer refused them. He felt the wheeled carriages would slow his cavalry down. He also believed using such overwhelming firepower against Native Americans would cause him to lose face. So Custer rode into battle without the Gatlings, and 200 of his men never rode out. The weapon designed to prevent needless death sat in a supply tent while men died needlessly, rejected by a commander whose ego was bigger than his tactical judgment. That pattern, a weapon too much for the mission and a man too proud to admit it, repeats throughout this entire story. 100 years after Gatling's patent, the Vietnam War created the problem his descendants at General Electric were born to solve. American helicopters, primarily the Bell UH-1 Iroquois, the legendary Huey, were the lifeline of the war. They carried troops, evacuated wounded, delivered ammunition, and provided close air support across thousands of square miles of dense jungle. But the Hueys were slow and thin-skinned, and they were at their most vulnerable during the moments they needed to hover low for landing and extraction. Single-barrel machine guns mounted on the helicopters overheated in the tropical air. They jammed. They failed at exactly the moment soldiers on the ground needed covering fire the most. General Electric's engineers looked at the problem and saw Gatling's original solution: multiple barrels, shared heat, and external power, so the firing mechanism did not depend on the cartridge itself. They scaled down the 20mm M61 Vulcan cannon, the rotary weapon already mounted on fighter jets, and rechambered it for the smaller 7.62 by 51mm NATO rifle round. The result was the M134 Minigun. The name was not ironic at the time. Compared to the Vulcan cannon, it was miniature. Compared to anything a human being could carry, it was enormous. 6 barrels, electrically driven, capable of sustained fire at rates between 2,000 and 6,000 rounds per minute without overheating or jamming. The M134 transformed helicopter warfare in Vietnam. Mounted on Huey door guns, on Cobra attack helicopter turrets, on AC-47 spooky gunships that circled above besieged outposts, raining fire in continuous spirals, the minigun did exactly what Gatling had dreamed a century earlier. It allowed a smaller force to project devastating firepower. The United States government purchased roughly 10,000 M134 miniguns during the war, but the minigun had a limitation that no amount of engineering could overcome. It was chained to its platform. Without the helicopter's electrical system to spin the barrels, without the aircraft fuselage to house thousands of rounds of linked ammunition, without the vehicle structure to absorb the recoil, the M134 was just 85 pounds of extremely precise metal that could not fire a single round. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. I cover the real stories behind iconic weapons and military history every week. Now this is where the story splits into 2 paths that would eventually collide on a movie set. Path 1. General Electric, drunk on the minigun's success in Vietnam, decided to chase Gatling's original dream to its logical conclusion. If the minigun was too heavy and too hungry for a soldier to carry, what about a smaller version? In the mid-1970s, General Electric engineers developed the XM214 microgun, a 6-barrel rotary weapon scaled down to fire 5.5 6mm ammunition, the same round used in the standard M16 rifle. On paper, the microgun was a breakthrough. The gun body alone weighed only 27 pounds, shorter than an M16 rifle. General Electric packaged it into a system called the Six-Pack, a self-contained unit with the gun, a rechargeable battery, and a 1,000-round ammunition module. The total weight was 85 pounds, the same weight as the full-size minigun, but now, theoretically, portable by a two-man team and mountable on a standard infantry tripod. General Electric pitched the microgun to everyone: the Army for infantry suppression, the Navy for riverboat defense, the Air Force for lighter helicopter pods. Company engineers drew up proposals for mounting arrangements that included aircraft doors, wing installations, nose turrets, and even a modified bomb bay packed with half a dozen microguns firing simultaneously. But the demonstrations exposed the same flaw Richard Gatling never solved. The weapon was too much for its purpose. At 4,000 rounds per minute, the M134 generated an average recoil force of about 99 pounds, with peak forces spiking to 220 pounds. Fired from an aircraft, the 5.56mm rounds were too light. They drifted into the slipstream. Their effective range was dramatically shorter than the 7.62mm rounds the M134 used. And on the ground, the weapon consumed ammunition so quickly that no infantry squad could carry enough to sustain it through even a brief engagement. The Army showed no interest. The Navy passed. The Air Force tested 10 pod-mounted units and moved on. General Electric tried rebranding the microgun as a ground defense weapon, but the battery had a tendency to fail at inconvenient moments, and the rate of fire was absurdly excessive for any infantry scenario that did not involve fighting an alien in a Central American jungle. After decades of quiet promotion with zero significant orders, General Electric removed the XM214 from their catalog entirely. By 2011, it was gone. It was replaced on the product page by the Iron Fist Active Protection System. The military's verdict was clear. A man-portable minigun was a fantasy. The physics did not cooperate. The logistics did not cooperate. The human body did not cooperate. Path 2. Jesse Ventura. Born James George Janos in Minneapolis in 1951, Ventura enlisted in the United States Navy in 1969 at 18 years old. He graduated from Bud's Class 58, the same brutal selection pipeline that produces Navy SEALs, and was assigned to Underwater Demolition Team 12, stationed at Subic Bay in the Philippines. He served in the Vietnam Theater, attached to operations in the Mekong Delta and the South China Sea. Later, from 1973 to 1975, he was assigned to SEAL Team 1 as a reservist. The distinction matters, and it mirrors the minigun's own identity crisis in ways that are almost too perfect. Ventura completed Buds. He served in a combat zone. He wore the Trident, but the technical classification of his service, Underwater Demolition Team Frogman versus SEAL Operator, became a controversy that followed him for decades. Other veterans accused him of inflating his record. Ventura insisted the Underwater Demolition Team and SEAL teams were functionally interchangeable, and in 1983 the Navy agreed, merging all Underwater Demolition Team personnel into the SEAL teams. A man whose credentials were real, but whose title was debatable, holding a weapon whose capabilities were real, but whose role was fictional. An 85-pound gun that no soldier could realistically carry in combat, shouldered by a man who had been a real special warfare operator, but whose exact designation was permanently in dispute. The casting was more honest than anyone on that set probably realized. After the Navy, Ventura became a professional wrestler, Jesse the Body Ventura, a character built on intimidation and spectacle. He was 6'4", over 250 pounds, and he could carry the modified M134 that Stembridge Gun Rentals had custom built for the production. This mattered more than acting ability. The weapon needed someone physically capable of holding it upright while it fired. The modifications Stembridge made to the prop tell their own story about the gap between fantasy and reality. The gun rental company installed an M60 machine gun handguard backwards underneath the minigun's barrels. This gave Ventura a forward grip where none existed on the real weapon, because the real weapon was designed to be bolted to a helicopter mount, not held by a person. They attached a rear pistol grip from the minigun's original spade grips to a custom Y-frame with an M16 style carry handle. They built a shoulder harness to transfer the weapon's 85-pound weight from Ventura's arms to his back and shoulders. Then they slashed the firing rate. Director John McTiernan wanted the barrels to be visibly spinning when the gun fired, not the invisible blur that 6,000 rounds per minute would produce. So they dialed it down to 1,250 rounds per minute, roughly 1/5 of the weapon's actual capability. Even at that reduced speed, with blank cartridges that produce less recoil than live ammunition, the weapon was barely controllable. The power cables running from an off-camera battery up through Ventura's clothing were carefully routed so they would not appear on film. During non-firing scenes, the gun was not connected to power at all, allowing Ventura to move freely with what was essentially a very heavy piece of metal sculpture. After every take of the jungle firefight sequence, the crew spent hours replacing the squib charges rigged to the surrounding trees and foliage. The special effects explosives, not the blank cartridges, created the illusion of the minigun shredding the forest. Even the stunt crew was reportedly speechless watching the gunfire. And here is the detail that ties it all together. The ammunition canister on Ventura's back held 25 seconds of fire. 25 seconds. The entire myth of Old Painless, the unstoppable handheld death machine that became the template for every video game minigun and every action movie prop gun for the next 4 decades, rested on 25 seconds of blanks and a lot of explosive charges wired to trees. Bill Duke, who played Mac and inherited the minigun after Ventura's character was killed, said firing the weapon was an amazing experience. He was not wrong. But it was amazing the way a rocket launch is amazing. Spectacular, brief, and completely unsustainable. The same minigun prop, the exact same physical weapon, appeared again 4 years later in James Cameron's Terminator 2: Judgment Day. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who had played Dutch in Predator, was reportedly the only person on the Terminator 2 set who could physically pick up and carry the gun without assistance. The prop department needed 2 men to lift it out of the truck, but in the film, the Terminator fires it one-handed from a motorcycle because the Terminator is a machine. That is the truth the movie accidentally told. When Blaine carries Old Painless through the jungle, when he opens fire on the guerrilla camp, when Mac picks it up and sprays the tree line in a grief-fueled rage after Blaine's death, we are watching men do something that real men cannot do. The weapon is performing a role it was never designed for, carried by an actor performing a military role slightly different from his real one, in a film where the ultimate enemy is an alien hunter with technology so advanced that all of humanity's firepower is meaningless against it. The Predator kills Blaine with a single plasma bolt. The man carrying the most devastating infantry weapon ever imagined dies without ever hitting his target. The minigun, the symbol of absolute human firepower, is rendered irrelevant by something from beyond human understanding. Mac empties the remaining ammunition into the jungle, shredding trees and undergrowth, and hits nothing. 600 rounds fired in fury at an enemy who has already vanished. Richard Gatling would have recognized the futility. He built his first gun because he believed that overwhelming force would make men stop fighting. Instead, they fought harder. The minigun was his idea perfected, a weapon so devastating that it should have made infantry combat obsolete. Instead, the military bolted it to helicopters and left the infantry with rifles, because the human body was never built to be a weapons platform. The M134 microgun sits in no arsenal. General Electric's dream of the man-portable rotary cannon died the way most weapons programs die, not with a dramatic failure, but with a quiet, administrative deletion from a product catalog. The M134 itself remains in active service around the world, mounted exactly where it was always meant to be, on vehicles, aircraft, and naval vessels. No infantry force on Earth has adopted a handheld minigun. None ever will. But in the mythology of popular culture, the handheld minigun is immortal. It appears in every first-person shooter, every action franchise, every military fantasy, where the laws of physics bend to accommodate the dream of one man carrying enough firepower to level a building. That dream was born on a movie set in Mexico, carried by a wrestler with a military background that was real but complicated, firing a weapon that was authentic but impossible, Jesse Ventura went on to become the governor of Minnesota, a professional wrestler turned Navy veteran turned actor turned politician. Each identity was real. Each one was also, in some way, a performance. The minigun was no different, a real weapon performing an impossible role and becoming more famous for the fiction than for the reality. And somewhere beneath all of it, buried under layers of Hollywood mythology and video game power fantasies, sits the quiet irony that Richard Gatling understood in 1862. The weapon that was supposed to make war smaller made it larger. The gun that was supposed to save lives took more of them. And the minigun that was supposed to give one man the power of 100 only proved that one man was never enough. If stories like this one get you thinking, the video on screen right now goes even deeper into a weapon that changed history. Click it.